Heading into week 13 of the fantasy football season, I'm giving you my starts and sits at the wide receiver position. The point of this video is not to tell you to start stars like your Justin Jefferson, your AJ Brown. I'm going to try and find guys who might be on the edge for you and either give you confidence to start them or maybe the advice to sit them. Do me a favor, why don't you comment down below your most difficult start sit decision of the week. Like the video, subscribe if you like the content, and keep in mind that the Cardinals and Panthers are both on bye this week. You will have no D-Hop, no Hollywood, no DJ Moore if you were planning on starting him for whatever reason. But I'll give you my first starts and then I'll go to sits at the end. My first start of the week, a wide receiver who's coming off a relatively disappointing performance this week. I like his matchup in week 13 though. That is Christian Kirk at the Detroit Lions. This is a fantastic matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. Detroit currently gives up the third most points to the position. And I know last week Kirk put up 8 fantasy points, I believe, but he was still heavily targeted. He had 9 targets. Keep in mind, in week 9 versus the Raiders, he had 9 targets. He had 21 points. So in week 3 versus the Chargers, he had 9 targets. He had 19 points. So it just did not work out this week for Christian Kirk. But let's keep in mind, last Thursday on Thanksgiving, Isaiah McKenzie out of the slot position put up 22 fantasy points, 96 yards, and a touchdown versus the same exact defense. So this could be a very, very good game for Christian Kirk. We could see a much more efficient offense versus Detroit and potentially a game that could have a lot of points. My second start of the week, one of my favorite players in Dynasty, is probably 5 names that you're thinking of right now. But that is George Pickens, one of my favorites in Dynasty. He goes up against the Atlanta Falcons, who currently give up the 4th most points to the wide receiver position. He's had a couple really good games in the past 3 weeks, being targeted, involved a lot, playing a high percentage of snaps. In Atlanta, this is a fantastic matchup where your wide receiver can really take advantage of the secondary. Kenny Pickett is growing each and every week, and we're starting to gain a little bit more trust with George Pickens. If he's on the edge for you and you're not sure where to start him, Colts was a really tough matchup. Now you have a really, really easy matchup here versus the Falcons. I really like Pickens as a flex option. I think he gets anywhere from 15 to 20 points here in week 13. My third start of the week, how about Devonta Smith versus the Tennessee Titans? Now, Devonta Smith is one of those players where it's boom and it's bust. There's not much in between, but he's on a high-powered offense. He's getting a good amount of targets. In the past 3 weeks, he has not failed to get at least 8 targets in every single game. Last week versus the Packers, 9 targets, only caught 4 of them for 50 yards, so a little bit disappointing, but I think he bounces back this week versus Tennessee, who currently give up the 2nd most points to fantasy wide receivers, so the matchup is fantastic. Don't forget that we saw Christian Watson put up 2 touchdowns versus this team in week 11, so they are beatable through the air. We have seen that time and time again this year. I like Devonta Smith. This should be a good week for him if you need a flex option. And for my 4th start of the week, finally, the wide receivers are coming alive in New York, and specifically with the Jets. Garrett Wilson at the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota currently gives up the 5th most points to fantasy wide receivers, and last week, Garrett Wilson had 8 targets. He caught 5 of them for 95 yards and a touchdown, over 26 fantasy points. The connection with Mike White is there. Well, and to be honest, you might even be able to add Elijah Moore to this list if you need a desperation start. I really like the matchup. I like the way Mike White is playing. He's much more open to throw to his wide receivers to use his weapons. So I think this is a really, really good matchup for all receivers. But you know, specifically, if I had to choose one, it would be Garrett Wilson, not Elijah Moore, but I still think Elijah could be a decent flex option. Excuse me, let's say you're in a 14-team league. I think he could be a really, really good option this week. All right, my 5th start of the week is Courtland Sutton at the Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore currently gives up the 6th most points to the position. Keep in mind what happened with Zay Jones last week. Zay Jones had a career high 145 receiving yards. He had 11 catches, over 27 fantasy points. Now Courtland Sutton gets to face this team. He has had pretty consistent performances in the past 3 weeks. When I say consistent consistently just okay. 12 points, 13 points, and 13.5 last week. Right around that 12 to 13 point mark. I think this week we could finally see a 15 to 20 point game for Courtland Sutton. The matchup is incredible. Hopefully they'll find ways to exploit it, but that all comes down to Russell Wilson. All we can tell you is that the matchup is good. If we had Courtland Sutton, we would start him. Now let's see if things are going to pan out the way that we think that they could potentially pan out. And my last start of the week, how about Tyler Lockett at the Los Angeles Rams? The Rams are currently getting torched defensively and in their secondary. Outside of Jalen Ramsey, this is a rough defense, and Aaron Donald, of course. But outside in the secondary specifically, outside of Jalen Ramsey, this secondary is rough. The Rams currently give up the 9th most points to fantasy wide receivers, and Lockett has been really consistent. Since week 7, every game has been over 10 fantasy points. Last week, he had 7 targets, caught 3 of them for 68 yards and a touchdown. He is always a candidate to find the end zone every single week. In fact, in half of his games this year, he has scored a touchdown. I think he continues that trend versus the Rams, and this could be a much easier game for the Seahawks if Bryce Perkins is at quarterback again. Now, to close the video, I'm going to give you 3 sits of the week, and starting with Michael Gallup versus the Colts. And this has a lot more to do with the matchup than the player. The Colts currently give up the fewest points to fantasy wide receivers. So I know Michael Gallup is coming off a pretty good game. His best game of the season, actually, since coming back from that injury. He had 8 targets, caught 5 of them for 63 yards. But this is not the matchup that I personally want to chase. This is a very good secondary, and they've proven that all year, consistently. My second sit of the week is any Ravens wide receivers versus the Broncos, who currently give up the 2nd fewest points to the position. I don't care what wide receiver it is. If you're thinking about starting them or playing them in any sort of contest this week, I would not suggest it. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can tell you that Denver is very good in their secondary, and it's not a joke, so I wouldn't play with them. And my third sit of the week is Curtis Samuel at the Giants. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Without Carson Wentz, Curtis Samuel is just not a startable asset. And the only way he is a startable asset is if it's a very good matchup. And we saw that last week versus the Falcons. He only had 1.3 points. Now he goes up against the Giants, who give up the 4th fewest points to the position. It's really just Terry McLaurin or bust for Taylor Heineke, if we're honest. So you can't start Curtis. I'm not going to. Those are my starts and sits of the week. Why don't you comment down below? Let me know your favorite one, maybe one that you're skeptical of, a difficult decision you're facing. Like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's good? Thanks for watching. We got a lot more videos.
A lot more.
If you want more videos.
Watch it.
You can also subscribe.
Right now.
If you want to.
You need to.
And lastly, don't forget that you can sign up to support the show and get exclusive content by going to patreon.com/FantasyLand fam.